Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Tom and some of you might know me as Bowl of Salmon on Instagram. Nothing works better to get a feel for a watch than exploring my hometown and gathering my thoughts about it over a good cup of coffee. Today we are taking a closer look at the Lorca Model Nr GMT. Lorca is based in New York and was founded by singer-songwriter Jesse Marchant. Born to Swiss-Canadian parents, Jesse's fascination for watches began after inheriting a vintage piece from his Swiss grandfather. The Lorca Model Nr. was introduced last year and is the first release from the brand. Jesse set out to create the ideal watch for him, one he would want on his wrist while being on tour. He wanted to create a travel watch that can fly under the radar, that can be used as a daily driver, but one that can still be worn in a more formal setting too, with plenty of vintage vibes but made to modern standards. I mentioned this before, for me to like a watch, I kinda have to develop that instant crush on it when I put it on the wrist. There has to be that little something that is hard to pin down, that unspoken enchantment. But what usually seals the deal for me is when a watch instantly looks good when I point my camera at it for a photo without having to do any party tricks to it. Let's run over some specifications first. The Model Nr. has a 316L steel case with a diameter of 36mm, and with the overhang of the bezel it brings it to a total of 37mm. The watch is 11.2mm thick, including the crystal. The watch has a very wearable lug-to-lug of 44mm and a lug width of 19mm. It's pretty rare to see GMT watches in this case size, and the total package has a very good diameter to height ratio. For the movement, the watch is powered by a Soprod C125 R4 automatic winding movement that has a date and GMT complication. It has a power reserve of 42 hours. This is a so-called caller or office GMT since you are able to set the GMT hand independently. If you change the main time, the GMT hand rotates as well. You set your local time on the main handset, you set the GMT hand to whatever other time zone you want to track. You might have heard of Soprod lately as more and more brands seem to be adopting their movements. Soprod is a Swiss supplier and is part of the Festina group. The Model Nr. is available in two dial variations. One has a silver sunburst dial and the other features a gloss black dial. The silver one has those lovely faded hues of champagne color on the dial. And because of the sunburst effect, to me, it has most going for it to keep me looking down on my wrist. So I'd probably pick this one as my favorite. The silver dial can be described as a warm silver, and depending on the light will allow more tones of champagne, thus giving it that warmer feel. And of course, the sunburst effect makes for a dynamic looking dial in harder sunlight. The polished indices and handset further enhance that effect. And to say it with the most overused yet best possible term in watch reviews, it just plays with the light beautifully. The GMT hand on the silver dial has a dark taupe gloss paint and in certain lights almost looks army green, while the rest of the polished handset blends in with the dial. Of course, you can never go wrong with a black dial either. The deep black lacquer will reflect that matte brushed handset. In terms of overall legibility, the black dial wins it out for me as the hands provide more contrast. At 12 o'clock we find the cursive Lorca logo on the dial, and below the center of the dial we find the words GMT and 20 ATM referring to a water resistance of 200 meters. At 3 o'clock we find an elegantly executed trapezium-shaped date window with a white date disc and a black font. Around the dial we have the raised rectangular steel indices at the hours, with double indices at 12, and in between there are the long printed markers indicating the minutes. There are minor lume plots above the hour markers, and on the Dauphine-shaped hands there is a mini strip of Swiss Superluminova applied. It's very subtle, but it does the job. I might have a thing for steel bezels, and I like this more minimalistic approach. The bezel has a fine circular brushing where a black diamond marker sits at 12 o'clock, and going around it alternates between showing numerals at the even positions and black circular markers in between. If you are like me trying to wrap your head around what exactly looks different rather than just the use of a small typewriter-like font, it's that all the numbers are just laid out in a horizontal position on the bezel, instead of most modern GMT bezels where they show the numerals printed in a circle. The diamond marker shape returns at the tip of the GMT hand. Again, Lorca didn't choose for a fat in-your-face GMT hand, but opted for a more unobtrusive version that rather disappears on the dial. I have to admit, it usually takes me an extra second to register the moving seconds, so I differentiate the second hand with the GMT hand. But it's not a concern. Everything about the watch has this less is more aesthetic, and nothing breaks out of that Art Deco vintage feel without it feeling outdated either. It really feels like this is a great blend of old and new. The small screw-down crown nests well behind the bezel, but it is still easy enough to operate. But with very fine threads on the crown stem, some Fingerspitzengefühl over a blunt force attack is preferred when screwing it back in. The case finishing takes a mix of satin brushed flanks with polished chamfers on the lugs. Seeing the side profile of the watch, the polished sloped lip of the bezel gives me a bit of those Speedmaster vibes. The case back takes a minimalist approach too, with just 2 fine circles engraved near the edge. Those lines also return on the clasp of the watch. And that brings me to the bracelet. I appreciate that the bracelet is not just an afterthought, but an integral part of the design, and it totally sells the vintage feel. 2 connectors attach the solid end links to the 9-link construction bracelet. There is a taper from 19mm to 16mm. It features screwed links and it has a double push button deployed milled clasp. I don't know if I should describe the bracelet as a beads of rice bracelet or a mesh bracelet. I guess it sits in between, but it's very comfortable. The clasp decoration is elegant with those 2 lines running along the edge and the cursive signature L. Some micro adjustments will allow you to find the perfect size, but you will need a tool or just a toothpick to adjust it when out and about. But I'd rather have this over a system that would add to the size of the clasp. This wouldn't be a bowl of salmon review if I didn't try the watch on a different strap. The case features drilled lug holes, so getting the bracelet off is easy enough. Now 19mm isn't that common, so I had to dig around to find the strap. With the lug holes sitting rather short to the case, I'd recommend using curved spring bars and maybe a curved strap, or you will damage the leather on the case sides. But with a bracelet pairing looking this good and sitting so comfortable, even I would probably never take it off the bracelet. With the short lug to lug, this will be a great watch for people with a slightly smaller wrist than me too. My wrist is 16.5 centimeters and it doesn't feel like I'm wearing a smaller 37mm watch. Maybe it even wears a little bigger than that, and for me that is a good thing. It's not a heavy watch, it has all the vintage appeal, but it doesn't feel flingy or dainty. It still has enough wrist presence, and I don't mean this that I care much about what others think, but just how it makes me feel when I wear it. I think you can already guess my conclusion towards this watch. Maybe I just have a problem, and that is that I fall in love with the models I shoot quite easily. Also, it doesn't make sense for me to invest 20+ hours into making these kinds of videos on watches that don't excite me. The Model 1 can make for an ideal daily watch. In my personal collection, it's a style of watch I don't have yet, so in that regard it would make a great addition to my watch box. I think it reminds me most of my vintage Omega Constellation, but I never connected with that watch because it felt too petite on my wrist and too fragile. The Lorca fixes that for me. So anyway, I hope this video is useful for you to make up your mind. If you're looking for a compact travel watch that balances between classy and rugged, vintage and modern at an honest price point, with a design that feels familiar but you won't be able to pinpoint why because it totally looks and feels like an original, well, maybe you need to consider this one. So kudos to Jesse and Lorca for designing something new that feels unique and different among all the watch releases we have seen. I'm very curious to hear what you think about these watches, but I'm also curious to hear what you think about some of the new lifestyle bits we tried to incorporate in this video. A big thanks to Ian and his interim assistant Justine, both for pushing me to step outside and for shooting these extra sequences. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments or come find me on Instagram. If you liked the video, do give it a thumbs up, and if you want to support the channel, all it takes is hitting that subscribe button. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.